She's my mother now.
Hey, Mark. Don't f*** with me.
If you've ever seen the movie The Bad Seed, then you'll understand when I say that Henry could have probably given Rhoda a run for her money. Diabolical doesn't quite describe Henry, and evil doesn't quite encompass all that he is. Henry was the devil himself. He was taking Mark and his sister Connie through it. Why Macaulay Culkin didn't get more awards for this, I'll never understand, because he ate this role up. And with that being said, while watching this movie, I noticed some things, and I have my thoughts. But before we get to that, it's time to recap. So let's get into it. As the movie starts, we meet one of our main characters, Mark. Mark and his dad are going through a lot at this time. Mark's mom's health is declining and things aren't looking good. Mark still tries to hold on to enough hope for the both of them. After the funeral, Mark's dad, Jack, and his uncle Wallace speak. Jack has a deal to attend to in Tokyo that could possibly set them up for the future. He doesn't want to leave Mark, especially so soon after the loss of his mom, but Wallace insists that he see this deal through, especially since he'd only be gone for 2 weeks. Wallace insists that Mark could benefit from being around other kids during this time. Jack opts to drive him to Wallace's home as a way to bond with Mark before he leaves. When they make it to Wallace's home, everyone is anxious to greet them. We meet Wallace's family, his daughter, Connie, his wife, Susan, and his son, Henry. At dinner, Susan tells Jack that she knows a psychologist who could help Mark through the loss of his mom. While watching Mark and Henry play during dinner, Jack and Susan feel confident that Mark will be just fine. For now. Jack says goodbye to Mark after dinner and reminds him he won't be gone for long. The next morning, Mark notices an empty room that seems to be for a child, but looks to have been untouched. We'll come back to this later. Mark was anxious to go outside and play with Henry. They start their day by adventuring through the woods, climbing trees and things, and getting a little too close to death.
If I let you go, you think you could fly?
It hasn't even been 24 hours, and Henry's already with the shit. They continue to have a long day of play and being a bit mischievous, including smoking cigarettes at this well and talking about death.
I took a real good look when my kid brother Richard drowned in the bathtub. You should have looked at her eyes and her lips and touched her skin to see what it felt like.
Shut up about my mom.
Again, it hasn't even been 24 hours. For the most part, everything seemed normal and Mark's first day was a success. The next day, Mark and Henry go to the docks to hang out. They run into this dog who has instant beef with Henry. Even the dog knew something wasn't right. Unfortunately, he will pay for this later. Po' little Fifi. Later, the boys see Susan standing on this cliff. Henry mentions how she goes there to think about Richard, his brother, and the son that she lost. Henry takes Mark to his shed. This boy has weapons that he's made himself. These parents left this kid alone far too long for him to build something like this. Henry has school shooter written all over him, but they take this weapon out for a little fun, or what Henry calls fun. Later, Mark goes to see the psychologist, Alice. Mark mentioned how he felt that his mom's death was his fault, that he let her die. Later on that night, he has a nightmare. When he wakes up, he mistakes Susan for his mom. To deal with his grief, he's chosen to believe that his mom came back as Susan. Poor Mark is going through it, and Henry starts to get jealous. Mark starts bonding with the family more, including Connie. Henry doesn't care for her too much, or the fact that Mark is bonding with her. Later, they test out his weapon on the dog from earlier, and let's just say Henry was pretty proud of his kill, while Mark was shocked.
I was only trying to scare him.
After this, Mark starts to distance himself from Henry. Something was clearly off about his ass. Later that day, Mark came across a picture of his mom. He mentioned to Susan that his mom said she'd always be with him, and Susan assured him that was so. They also come across a picture of Richard. Soon after, Henry came to drag Mark back out to his shed and lie.
It was an accident. You don't think I'd do a thing like that on purpose, now, do you?
Henry wanted to show Mark his new friend and bring him along on a new diabolical adventure. Tell me why he decided to throw this thing over this bridge and cause these cars to crash into each other. Child, I would have been like, call my daddy and call him right now. After this happens, they run and hide from the cops. Mark learns just how crazy Henry is.
Once you realize you can do anything, you're free. Nobody can touch you. You're sick. I promise you something amazing, something you'll never forget. There's the gratitude.
Their activities land on the news, and Mark gets the urge to tell Wallace, but Henry puts a stop to that real quick when he suggests that he not even waste his time, because Wallace wouldn't believe him anyway. Mark runs to Henry's room. Soon after, Connie comes in to tell Mark something, and Henry tells her to get out. When she doesn't move fast enough, Henry grabs her, which upset Mark enough to hem him up. Connie ran to tell their parents while Henry told Mark what he was capable of.
Such a sweet little girl. Too bad if something were to happen to her. She got hurt. You'd be sad, wouldn't you, Mark? Just ask my mom about Richard.
When Susan made it up there, Henry lied and insisted they were just playing a game. The next day, Mark opted to go to the park instead of attending his session with Alice. She met him at the park to check on him, and Mark asked her what makes people evil where they don't have a reason to be. Alice says she doesn't believe in evil, but Mark insists that she should. Meanwhile, Henry was still up to his antics. Jack calls to check on Mark, but Henry told him he wasn't around. Later during dinner, Henry told his parents that Mark wanted to move into Richard's room. It was a lie. Mark says it was a lie, but this gets lost due to Wallace insisting that this will be a good way for Susan to start getting over Richard's death. This upsets Susan. Henry goes upstairs to revel in the misery he's caused. Sometime later, Wallace and Susan go out and leave the kids home alone. The fact that our parents used to leave us in the house by ourselves. Child, I mean, they'd be going to work, out with their friends, to the store. We knew how to act though. While the parents were gone, Henry, Mark, and Connie played hide and go seek. Knowing what Henry is capable of, Mark tries to protect Connie from him by opting to read her a bedtime story. Shortly after, Connie drifted off to sleep. Henry came in to check on them. Tell me why Henry was plotting on his own sister.
Such a sweet little thing. Do you really think I'd hurt her?
The next morning, Mark overhears Susan crying about Richard's death. She blames herself for leaving him alone with Henry. As they're talking, Mark overhears that Henry took Connie to Miller's Pond to ice skate, so he rushes over to check on her. As he gets there, he sees Henry swinging Connie around on the ice. He intentionally slings her to thin ice. When she falls through the ice, he pretended to save her.
Help me, Henry, help me! Henry, help me!
He really tried to kill this girl. After this, Mark finally builds up the courage to tell Susan what really happened, but she doesn't want to believe it.
He threw her toward the thin ice. Henry said he hated her. You don't know what he is. Henry tried to kill Connie and you could do it again.
Oh, stop it! Stop it! That's a lie!
She really slapped that boy. Again, I would have called my dad and been like, come get me now. Meanwhile, Henry was still lurking. His mom was still around though, not letting Connie out of her sight. Susan asked Henry what happened, but Henry insisted it was an accident. Mark finally gets a hold of his dad and tells him about Henry's antics. His dad tells him to go talk to Alice, probably thinking that this was some episode due to his grief that he needed to talk through. Regardless, Mark does what he says and goes to see Alice, but of course, Henry had already beat him to it.
I didn't mean to cause any trouble. The way he acts when nobody's around, he scares me sometimes.
After Henry's session with Alice, he returns home to rub it in Mark's face. Mark tells Henry that sooner or later, his parents are going to find out about him. He also tells Henry that Susan is actually his mom now, believing that his mom chose Susan as another mom for him. And I guess that really got under Henry's skin.
She's my mother now.
Hey, Mark. Don't fuck with me.
Later that night, as Mark went down for a snack, Henry was already downstairs waiting for him. Henry insinuates that he poisoned the food in the fridge. To prevent the family from being poisoned, Mark threw all the food in the garbage disposal. Henry didn't poison the food. It was another trap to make Mark look crazy in front of Susan and Wallace. It was around this time that Susan started to get suspicious of Henry. The next day, Susan went to Henry's shed to poke around. She ends up finding Richard's rubber duck. Soon after, Henry comes in and is surprised to see her there. She shows him the rubber duck she found. She mentions that she couldn't find it after Richard's accident, and Henry insisted that it was his before it was Richard's. Henry asked for it back, but Susan said no, which sends Henry into a rage fit. This devil grabs the rubber duck and throws it into the damn well. Later on, Mark finds Henry practicing his cry, preparing for his mother's funeral. This kid is diabolical. He pretty much confirms his intentions to kill Susan.
Your mom, my mom, what the hell? We'll both miss her.
I'll kill you first.
Poor Mark. So violent, so disturbed.
Wallace bursts into the room to find Mark holding scissors up to Henry's neck. He takes Mark downstairs and locks him in his office. As he looks out the window, he sees Henry taking Susan somewhere, and he immediately knows what's about to happen. Mark busts out the window with a chair and goes to save her. As they're walking, Susan asks Henry again what happened to Richard. Henry starts to lie, but Susan asks a more direct question.
Did you kill Richard?
What if I did?
Well,
You don't look too good, Mom. Looks like you need the help.
Henry starts going on about how Susan might send him to a hospital somewhere. Baby, you're lucky she doesn't send your ass to the upper room, to the head honcho himself. Henry starts running to the cliff that Susan always goes to think about Richard. Susan runs after him, but loses sight of him. As she looks for him, he comes behind her and pushes her off the cliff. If that wasn't enough, he starts throwing rocks down at her to make her lose her grip and fall. As she tries to climb back up, Mark tackles Henry to the ground and they start to tussle. Susan makes it back up just in time to catch them from falling off the cliff. Now she had to decide which child to save.
Mom, I need your other hand.
The fact that death is near and his ass is still trying to ensure his cousin doesn't make it? Child. Susan makes the right choice though. And that was the end of the movie. And here are my final thoughts. Poor Mark was going through it this entire movie. Not only did he lose his mom, but he was sent to his cousin's home, and child Henry was with the mess from day one. Henry had him dangling from the treehouse, made him an accessory to his crimes, killed the poor dog for recognizing how evil he was, threw a homemade dummy in the middle of the road where he could have possibly killed people. This evil child drowned his own brother, then took the rubber duck given to his brother because it belonged to him first. Then when his mother asked him about it, he pretty much told her, "And what are you going to do about it?" And let's not forget that he tried to kill his sister and his mama for no reason other than he just wanted to. Obviously, Henry had no reason to be as evil as he was. It seemed like he just came out that way. But my question is, do you think people who are born evil and do evil things like Henry can be healed? Let me know what you think in the comments. On top of Henry being murderous, he was so manipulative. He consistently set Henry up to look like the bad guy, making him doubt people would believe him if he told them what Henry had done, setting him up to freak out about something, and then running to tell his parents that Henry was acting weird or that he was afraid of what he might do. Could you imagine a grown-up Henry with those type of tendencies? Could you imagine him in the corporate world? My goodness. One random thing that I noticed while watching this movie was that Henry and Mark were outside. These kids were everywhere by themselves. And if you were raised in the 90s, early 2000s, then you know that we used to be outside. And if you had bikes or skates, baby, we weren't a street over. We were in different neighborhoods, having fun, playing games. It was a time. But maybe Susan and Wallace should have been paying more attention to Henry, because how did he have enough time to build a whole weapon? Were y'all that preoccupied? Anyway, that's it for this review. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. As for the next review, all I'm going to say is year 2000, highly requested. This movie is based on a book by a popular author of the 90s, and it stars some of our Black Hollywood faves. And this relationship, child, it was doomed from the very start. See you next time, you guys. Bye.